Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Killoy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. Today on the show, I have Dan Evans. He served in United States Marine Corps from 2003 to 2016, and he left after 13 years as a gunnery sergeant. He currently lives in San Antonio with his wife and 3 beautiful kids. He just wrapped up his career at USAA and is getting to start his career as Chief Marketing Officer at N2 Growth. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Pleasure to be here today.
Go ahead and describe a little bit what your family looks like and any gaps in the intro that you want to share with us.
Oh man, I've got a beautiful wife and 3 kids, and for me, they are the foundation for everything that I do. Every choice that I made, they are the reason why I left the Marine Corps at 13 years as a gunnery sergeant, which many people told me I was absolutely crazy. It's like, what are you doing, man? You're forgetting.
You're on the home stretch.
Yeah, you're on the home stretch. Just do another 7 years. And I'm like, listen, I'm not going to have a family to come home to if I do another 7 years doing this. So for me, I had served my country. I had done well. I picked up gunnery sergeant at 9. I had a good run, 4 years as an E7. I was done. It was time to move on. It was time to create, the work-life integration that I felt I needed to just to be there for my kids. I had missed a lot of that being on recruiting duty. I'd spent 9 of my 13 years in recruiting. And even though I was working around the corner from our house, I had missed those birthdays. I had missed those anniversaries. Was
it a mindset issue, or was it just the way that the recruiting world is set up?
It was the disgusting inefficiencies of the Marine Corps Recruiting Command that they allowed to have happen, that they allowed, the leadership allowed, this mismanagement, this lack of efficiency to occur, and for me, that created an opportunity, where I learned how and pioneered how to use social media to enhance the recruitment process. Because I
build a
couldn't,
funnel that you don't have to engagingly work for every single person that walks in that door.
Well, it was still a lot of work, but I think at the end of the day, I felt responsible for my Marines, and I couldn't sit there at 9 p.m. at night looking at my Marines and being okay with the fact that they didn't have appointments the next day. And not only that, there was a family at home waiting for them. And there was a family at home waiting for me. So I think, for me, I've always been one of the mindset that it's a choice. You have the choice to change your circumstances. And that's exactly what I did.
There is a book I read, Gary John Bishop, called Fuck Yourself. And he says something in there that I repeat off to myself. You have the life you're willing to live, or you have the life you're willing to tolerate.
Yeah.
Whatever your problems are, you have the life that you're willing to tolerate. And if you're tolerating it, then you're obviously not willing to change. And if you wanted to change, then you would. But
that's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that life happens to you life happens for you, not to you. So, in my particular circumstance, I had realized that, when I picked a staff sergeant, that the grass on the other side of the fence was not green, it was brown. And I had an opportunity to water it and make it green and create it however I wanted to. And that's exactly what I did. I started going to school. Even though I did not finish my degree, I'm within a couple of classes to finish that. For me, it hasn't been a showstopper in any case. I was interviewing at, Facebook and Qualtrics and those types of things when I transitioned out of the Marine Corps, ensuring that you have that education that's practical, it's realistic, it's timely, it's relevant. And, I think those are the types of things that make, the grass on the other side of the fence green. So
our opening question, I think, is going to be interesting from you. What does it mean for you to come home? Maybe I would answer this question. How did you come home when you were serving, knowing that you were a little bit away than you wanted to? Like, were you intentionally coming home, or were you kind of like more mindless back in those days?
Like when I was in the service?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was not home.
But when you did come home, did you consciously come home and like try to be as close as possible when you were home? Or was it more just kind of trying to keep the craziness of work away? And
I was never really mentally home. I can say that with confidence. I mean, I was so determined to change my circumstances. It was, weekends I was writing papers for school, and Sundays I would be writing papers for school. And Sunday evening I was going to the recruiting office to give a shipping brief to our outgoing recruits. And I was, hitting the rack when I was done with that. After spending a little bit of time with the family, I would do the best I could. But there was no vacations. There was no time set aside. And honestly, man, I was not a good father. I was not home. I wasn't home. And quite honestly, living in that lifestyle, it was just not even possible for me to do that. There was a reason why. I was looking around at some of those fellow people who shared our same military occupational specialty, and they were on their third and fourth and fifth marriage, and they had relationships with their kids that were not great.
I've known dads that never actually got to know their kids until they joined the military themselves.
Yeah, and that was not the situation I wanted to be in. I met my own father when I was 17, and he was not a part of my life growing up, and my wife had some things on her side of the family where she did not have a great relationship with her parents. And since then things have changed significantly, but I wanted to be able to provide the most normal upbringing I could for my kids. So that shaped all of these decisions that have brought me, to where I'm at today.
So I observed, my Marine Corps career was in Okinawa, and I observed the families and going for Thanksgiving while I was over there with other gunnies and staff sergeants that invite us over, and they got to know their families, and the amount of emotional, like just being there with their kids and knowing what they go away with, and when they go away all the time. Like, I knew very early on, I was like, I'm not going to start a military family. But for you, for the dads out there that have started a military family, I think we often get stuck on that our service is a noble thing. And we get hung up on that we're just going to prioritize this noble thing, that this is more noble than being a dad. But that's just like a credit card debt that you keep borrowing from. And I'm sure when you, even when you first made the decision to leave, it was still like this weight that you had to, this debt that you probably had to start walking to start paying back.
Yeah. I mean, it was, it's one of those things that I've made a very conscious effort ever since I got out of the military to make sure that I've been more involved with my oldest two, who are now 12 and 11.
If you don't mind sharing, because I imagine there's a pretty good story here, can you take us to the moment where you decided no more? Was it one moment?
Yeah, it kind of. I mean, it was when I was a staff sergeant. I re-enlisted, and that was, I think, probably 2010, 2011. And I remember being so upset. I'm like, man, why did I do this? I felt like it was an obligation. It was something that I had to do because, again, going back to that analogy of the grass on the other side of the fence is greener, and I realized it was brown. I had not prepared myself adequately to be able to make a transition where I could provide for my family and, be that person that I wanted to be. It was tough. I realized I had to make a conscious investment in myself. I started going to school full time while I was on active duty, and on recruiting duty. That was not an easy thing. That meant early mornings. I remember going to 6 a.m. classes at Utah Valley University and being done by 7:45 in the morning and heading over to the recruiting office. I remember leaving the recruiting office at 7:30 at night, heading back to Utah Valley University, attending evening classes, and getting home at 10, 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes I would drive myself back to the recruiting office, and I would work on papers because it was quiet there. I had my own little office. I had a space. I had a computer, and I would just sit in there and I would type papers until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I wasn't home. But for me, my wife and I, we started having kids at age, 21, which I think a lot of enlisted people probably, could relate. That's seems to be, a common
You
thing.
barely lived any of your life or any of your early adult life where you get to explore and understand who you are.
Right. Which I don't regret any of that because I learned a lot of things along the way. I distinctly remember being so broke that I donated plasma to make money and be able to make ends meet, and any kind of gift money that we're getting along the way as, young adults, young married people, we were taking that gift money and cashing the check and turning that money into, payment for utilities. Yeah. Utilities, baby formula, what have you. We bought our house at the peak of, the mortgage bubble, overpaid by at least $25,000. And we're upside down in that for a number of years. But, from all of that, I would say that I learned a lot and I grew up very, very quickly. And, raising 2 kids, I was, forced to man up. Yeah. And, those 2 children who came back to back, my son is 14 months apart from my firstborn. They completely shaped me into who I am today because they forced me to be responsible, to, make conscious decisions in
aren't
every
just based
aspect.
On your selfish own internal reasons, that you have someone else that counts on you for everything in life.
That's exactly right. So it was not easy, but I wouldn't trade that experience, for anything, because I think it's 100% shaped me into who I am today. I don't believe that even with all of those hardships and those challenges, I don't think that those were without some kind of greater purpose. And for some of those things that I'm still struggling with to understand, I think those things will become clear later on.
Yeah, you can't always make sense of how you can find purpose in something that was hard, but generally the people with the hardest stories are the ones that have the greater success.
Right.
Dave Ramsey tells a story when he tells it of the first time he went broke. And I often repeat this to myself, that one thing he learned when he was at rock bottom was that there was a bottom. And all he had to do was stand back up and start over. So a lot of times, I think we don't often get a lot of times chances in life to hit rock bottom, but it's almost good that we do, because we do get that firm reminder. Wow, there is a bottom. All I got to do is get back up and continue breathing and start over again. And that's what he did. And then he created the empire that is the Ramsey legacy now. And that came from the worst failure of his life.
And look at how many people he's helped as a result.
Yeah, I mean, his story has touched millions. Even my life, I'm debt free now because I found his story.
So, I mean, with those hardships, I think you have the ability to either take those things and make them into, roadblocks for everything good in your life, or you can turn those things around and you can turn them into a positive and make an impact. You can inspire others, and you can serve as a lighthouse to serve as an example to inspire others to become something greater than they even thought possible. And I think that's what's most important.
Yeah. One of the simplest things that we talk on every episode is that the easiest way to a kid's heart is with time. They spell love TIME. Now that you've learned how to come home and you've transitioned, rebuilt your life to come home and be present, what are some of the simplest ways that you use to connect to your kids that they remember the most, that are often the simplest and cheapest and
Well,
often the least complicated.
Well, for me, selfishly, I've always made it a priority to tell my kids that I love them. For me, I grew up with my grandparents, and I don't remember my grandpa ever telling me, "Hey, I love you."
Same here. I don't ever remember my dad either, or even I'm proud of you. I don't remember that either.
And maybe that's a generational thing. I don't think not saying it meant that, but for me, just taking time to look at my kids in the eye and be like, listen, I love you, Brighton. I'm very proud of you for, just you being you, man. I had the opportunity a couple weeks back to go to the 5th grade camp with my son, Brighton, and serve as a cabin dad. Cabin dad with 7 other boys, which is a cool experience.
Was that chief storyteller then too?
I'm not really sure, but it was good. It was a good experience because I think he'll remember that for the rest of his life. Me going out and kind of hanging out with his buddies, and shuffling them between canoeing and fishing and all these other activities that they did for this 5th grade camp. But one thing that stood out to me and it was really impactful. It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily around, my son, but it was another young man who was there at this camp, and his dad was deployed. And he had been deployed, I think, for about 10 months. He's still deployed. He's going to be back, I think, in May. And immediately, like I was wearing my camouflage backpack, it was evident that I had served in the Marines. This kid just kind of like gravitated towards me. And for whatever reason, like anything I said, he's like, yes, sir. I'm not sure if it's like a South thing. I'm like, hey, we need to do this, or we need to do that, and I need you to volunteer for this. And I looked at him and I'm like, hey man, like if your dad could be here, he would, and I want to let you know that, I am grateful for your dad's service on behalf of our country, because he was deployed. He didn't have any choice in the matter to not be there, with his son for that 5th grade camp. But for me, as a former Marine or, enlisted guy, I felt good that I could, at least kind of resonate with this young man, in addition to my son, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
the other 5 kids that were in our cabin, and just kind of, share that common ground, I guess, of just kind of being like a military guy. I can appreciate that, and I think he kind of saw that, I'm a military guy, and hopefully that inspired a little bit of hope in him that, hey, at one point in time, soon, hopefully, his dad will be back and be able to spend some time with him.
Did you ever think about writing his dad a letter about that experience and what you observed about his son?
No, but that's a good idea.
Because
Totally.
I would honestly bawl my eyes out if I got a letter from someone describing how my son achieved something or what type of man he was becoming. Like, that would just blow me out, and I would hold on to that forever.
That's a good idea. Maybe I should. It wasn't too long ago, so I don't think it'd be too late. But
and just like filling in the gaps, and and since you're a fellow military, like he would just like, that's what makes military special, is we're always able to fill in the gaps even when we can't be there. And as much as that tugs on his heart that he can't be there, because I'm sure his son talked to him about it when he talked to him over the internet, and just getting it from a man's perspective of what kind of a man his son's growing up to be when he can't be there.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I should definitely do that.
What about for your daughters?
Well, I've got
one daughter.
I just try and do my best with her. She's very independent. That's just how she came to us. She was very independent. She's very, very confident. Very smart. We bought like a piano, and 2 weeks later she's playing Bohemian Rhapsody on the piano. She taught herself. She's brilliant, You know, she plays
She's going
violin.
places you can't even imagine yet.
I'm like, man, you know, like when I was a kid, I could barely do like geometry, and
Yeah.
here she is, you know,
Blowing away on a
doing.
piano.
Oh my gosh, yeah, she's incredible. She's extremely talented. But yeah, I mean, I just try and be there for her the best that I can. You know, I'm learning, you know, how to be the father that I need to be for her. I'm sure I'm imperfect at times. You know, that's just being completely honest and candid. I'm sure that you know, sometimes I've got the bar a little high.
Have you ever read Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters?
No, I should probably read that.
It's been recommended a couple times in this, and I read it like 2 years ago before I think I had my third daughter or my second daughter, who's our youngest. It just blew me away of like the role that dads can play in a daughter's life, and like who they go out to seek in the world is what we modeled to them, and or whatever we didn't give them, like just hugging your daughter. There's a 60% chance less that she'll have sex by the age of 12 because she won't seek that physical touch from the first person that gives it to her because you gave it to her as her dad.
Well, I mean, I think from that standpoint, I think I'm doing okay. I mean, always, you know, telling her that I love her and giving her hugs, and you know,
my daughter has a confidence problem, so I always struggle to coach her through just being comfortable with who she is and like getting her to recognize that she's enough. Because she's always super hard on herself. She doesn't believe she can do it. And I think in 2019, and I can only imagine when she's a teenager, that women, it's just going to exponentially be harder for women to just be okay with who they are in their own body, with all the social media and Hollywood, that just recognizing that they're beautiful just who they are is something I'm always reminding them of as well.
Yeah. How old's your daughter?
My oldest is just turned 7 and my youngest is 2.5.
Okay. So my daughter is 12. She's going on 13 this year. And one of the big things that she's been into lately is, you know, she wants to do a YouTube channel. She's been following all these YouTube creators.
My daughter's hooked on JoJo. God,
Yeah.
JoJo's everything right now.
And
JoJo bedspread.
And I'm kind of caught in between, you know, being a marketing guy. I'm like, yeah, I see there's an opportunity here, and this is the way of the future. You know, but at the same time, you know, I'm not sure if you saw Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet.
I did.
You know, there's a scene in there where they're like, never look at the comments. Don't look at the comments. You know, because that can be just like, that can wreck you, you know, and especially as a young kid.
Especially on YouTube even. YouTube.
Oh my gosh.
Worst comments. I mean, that's true. YouTube, that was an adult joke there. YouTube, there's a podcaster who he goes to the internet just to he calls a section of people of the internet is what he calls it, because he just reads these crazy freaking comments.
So I'm kind of caught in the middle. I'm like, you know, maybe give her the flexibility to create her own YouTube channel and be able to kind of, you know, tell her story, or, you know, whatever that is. I do believe that there's an opportunity there to create a reputation for yourself. I mean, she's smart. She's doing a lot of interesting things. I think people would, by and large, subscribe to her channel. But at the same time, it's like, man, you know, like I know that people are mean, and
they're going to want, usually they're mean when they see someone having success. Zig Ziglar always said it best. People, sometimes the only taste of success people get is when they take a bite out of yours.
Right. And it's said another way. I mean, misery loves company. So if people are, you know, not happy with their own lives, they're going to inflict that on others. And I'm just not sure I'm quite prepared for that. But
can you turn YouTube comments off? I've never checked.
I think, yeah, you can do that. But at the same time, you know, that's a factor in an engagement that kind of helps drive the growth of your channel. So I think it could be an opportunity. But at the same time, it's like, well, what are we shielding them from? I mean, you know, the second they turn, you know, 16, 17, 18, I mean, they're going to be on these social media sites anyway, whether it be something, you know, that exists today or maybe something we've never even heard of. And, you know, there's still a social element that exists where they can comment and kind of showcase those things. And for that, I'm, you know, very, very afraid. I mean, with my own upbringing growing up, I mean, I've realized that, you know, kids are mean, and and it's hard, it's tough, but you know, as a parent, you don't want your kid to experience that type of pain, but at the same time, it can be.
I don't know how
growth opportunity.
I don't know if you read this headline. It just came over, I think, this weekend, that there was a study that like there's a 30% decrease in the amount of just people having sex these days because of the connection to social media. They have no real world connections anymore, that they just aren't doing it. So then there's these barriers they can't overcome just to make kids and continue the population. And it's like it went from 30% like in just a few years. Like it's almost probably an epidemic even. So at some point, probably within our parenting, we have to, like, if she did do a YouTube channel, it would be making sure that there's always the balanced approach and even the authentic approach, like just making sure you're not the Kim Kardashian where you're completely one version online. If you ever met me in life, it'd be like, oh, I'm not that person online. Like,
right.
Or even just having like not outsourcing. I feel like, and I'm still too early to have this. So this is still, I would say, R&D in my head, but part of it, I feel like when you outsource that sociability just to others and likes and an algorithm, like I know from my own experience with this podcast that I didn't actually believe it was possible until I stepped into the real world and met real people that my podcast was going to impact. And that's not on social media. And I've now got a balanced approach that I have an online presence, but I am also very keen on making sure I have physical connections, because when life gets hard, it's the physical ones that are going to get you through it. Nobody online is going to be able to hold your hand.
Right.
They can help and they'll get you places, but at the end of the day, it's the human connections that you make. Like I even like social media 10 years ago was the next big thing. Like I'm big on people to people is really the next big thing. Human connection will be the next revolution, or not revolution, but we'll go back to the old way of just connecting people to people and understanding their story. And social media will get there. It'll get you there faster for likability, but the human connections, I think, are important. So some probably, and somehow we teach our kids through social media is that balanced and authentic. But I have no idea how to all do that. That's just things I'm thinking about in my head of what I have to keep in my mind is.
Well, I'll tell you, Ben, there's not a whole lot of people who are being authentic and kind of showcasing, things
The real
like
side of them.
or even like things like you're doing right now with your podcast, or the things that I've done with my podcast in the past, or just kind of putting it all out there. I've always been a firm believer in building a personal brand, showcasing who you are, what you represent, and under this philosophy of your vibe will attract your tribe, and you're going to repel these people that have no desire to connect with somebody like you because they're just not interested in who you are or what you represent. But at the same time, you're going to attract those types of opportunities and those types of people who can add value. And I'll tell you, from my own experience using social media and kind of just putting myself out there, I'm not sure what your initial perception is or has been with kind of what I've put out there, but we've never met in person. But I've always been a firm believer, like, hey, I'm just going to be who I am. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to share articles that are of interest to me and that align with who I am as a person. I'm going to showcase, these, authentic moments. You mentioned that I was earlier before we started this podcast that I was feeding my son some noodles. We went over to the Pearl Brewery earlier today, and they've got a nice little place where you can get what is that stuff called? Some noodles. I don't know what they're called.
Ramen noodles?
Ramen noodles. Yes, thank you. Ramen.
They didn't look like ramen noodles.
Yeah, it was some bougie ramen, so it was really good ramen. And I was feeding my son ramen noodles. It was the funniest thing. But those types of micro moments that you're showcasing that are just you and the authentic you.
That's where your frequencies are starting to vibe, and like where you start to recognize like Dan's kind of just like me, or that there's like, we've got some commonality, maybe even similar sense of humor. It's like flirting a little bit. I've heard it described that, where you're just kind of like checking each other out, figuring out if there's something there. But those connections it's the overall piece of the pie, not like the one article, but it's what you share in between. It's the whole thing that becomes what you're talking about for that personal brand.
Right. And I'm not sure how you vet people for a podcast, but, I would say looking at your podcast and the people that you've had on it, I'm probably aligned with that avatar.
It's very
or that
unserious.
persona.
I really just do a quick Facebook scroll to make sure they're not sharing every political post they can on their Facebook feed. And as long as they're not crazy or appear to be crazy, or at least I've had some connection. I don't think I've done any like random stranger. I guess I did 2 random strangers maybe. But so far it's worked out pretty good for me. Somehow my gut feeling of being online for a while, I've got a good vibe for whether people are growth minded or whether they're fixed minded and waiting for the world to fix it for them.
So I think, just putting it out there, not being afraid. And I think, from a parent perspective, I'm going to encourage my kids to do that when they get to that point, and to help them understand that if, people don't agree with them or they don't jive with them, they're not missing out on anything. It's just,
I
the
heard
way
it said
is.
that learning what you stand against is more powerful than learning what you stand for. So when the world does come back and you quickly figure out, yeah, I'm not that guy.
Right.
And that can help you realign to even your own self.
Right. And I think that's healthy, just being you. You should match who you are offline as you are online. And I think, by and large, I think the population is comfortable representing themselves in a different way online, and they're vastly different offline.
Oh yes, I would say that they'll say things online that they'll never say in person.
Yeah, it's like, who is this person? Like, who is this? You meet them in person, you're like, man, I'm really unsure who this person is.
And then you don't trust them, which is something very important in business. And when you don't trust someone, like I'm real big. If I have any idea that you're having an agenda or that you're having some blind side that you're trying to hide from me, like that's when I cross you off the list.
Right. So I think with that, there's also an opportunity. There's always a silver lining. There's always an opportunity. When you can represent yourself authentically, you're going to attract the types of opportunities which will be conducive to your goals, especially if you've identified exactly what those goals are and where you want to go and what you want to accomplish. So
you've kind of had a mix life as a dad. You've had one where you were always at work. Now you're completely rewiring your life to be always at home. When your kids are standing around at a bar talking to their friends, what do you hope they say about you?
I hope they see me as an example of somebody who's made it work, no matter what. I came from the enlisted side of the Marine Corps. I could tell you how many people I talked to during my transition that told me, hey, you need this credential or that credential, or you need this experience or that experience. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. And I want to be that example for my kids, because the world tells them, they go to school, they're conditioned that they need to learn this skill or that skill, or have this credential to be able to achieve their dreams. And that's just not true. How many people—
that learning happens in a straight line almost.
Right. How many people do you know that have credentials or have degrees that are doing something completely different from that credential or that degree? It's like, boom, I rest my case. Everybody knows probably 80% of their sphere of influence that is doing exactly that. They spent $40,000 to $60,000 to $80,000 on an education. They put themselves massively into debt. They set themselves back, and they're working in a career or an industry that doesn't even require that, or it's completely on the other end of the spectrum of what they studied and learned.
And you forgot 2 important parts, because I classify that as the modern American dream, that you took on the debt, you have a car payment, you probably got married and have kids, and now you have a job you don't like, and now you have debt and you have kids to feed. So you continue down that road to misery. And one of the reasons why I was very passionate to get rid of our debt was because I want choices. I want to hold the entire deck of hands the deck of cards in my hands. And when you create that mindset and that get trapped, the bank has your cards. And so That's for me, like that was one of the parts. And it's frustrating because so many people are going down that road, and I don't think it's not turning anything. If anything, people are just getting slower. That millennials aren't buying houses. They aren't starting families. Now we're learning they're not having sex anymore. like the divide is we haven't reached the pinnacle of break even yet, where we start to change the pendulum. But I completely agree with you there. One of the questions this question was born from was a friend worded it as, whenever you're a dad, you can get caught up and judge yourself on maybe when you yelled at your kid, maybe you didn't handle a situation, but you really got to frame it like, what's going to really matter when they're talking to their friends at a bar when they're 30? Like, what things are you doing that are going to move that needle of that conversation? Because that's really where the legacy picks into, and all of the things that really matter are leading into what do they look back on your life and think about. They're not going to think about that time. And like adults hold on to things for days. Kids hold on to things for 5 minutes, if that. Sometimes you can yell at them and they can be kicking you. And literally 2 minutes later, it's like they never happened. They just want to go play trains.
And I think the other thing too is like just having the mindset that you're not trading time for money. You know, that's just the biggest fallacy on the planet. Your compensation that you can earn within the marketplace is a direct tie to your ability to add value. And that's it. Whether it takes you 5 minutes or if it takes you 500 hours, you will be compensated based off of your ability to add value to the marketplace. Plain and simple, bottom line up front. And I think our society conditions you to feel like you need to work hard or you need to work in a role that is unpleasant, where you're not having fun. And I think, you know, based off of my limited amount of work experience in the corporate world, I've seen a number of people whose expectation is that work shouldn't be fun. When you go to work, it shouldn't be fun. It should be very serious. It should be very, stodgy and, and if you're having fun, you're wrong. And what's wrong with you if you're having fun?
Millennials always get a bad rap because we want to have fun, or like somehow we feel entitled to have fun, but it's not really an entitlement. It's we have just recentered our living and our purpose around being happy and being more tuned into what we were actually put on this earth to do versus whatever crack in the corporate world we ever landed into and staying in that crack. Like that's just not how we think anymore.
And I think there's a difference between fun and messing around. There's a clear difference. But you can have fun, work hard, and create something of value and deliver to the marketplace and enjoy what you do. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I think, society has conditioned us, to, slam the 9 to 5, to say, TGIF, thank God it's Friday. Oh, somebody's got a case of the Mondays. And really,
I hate that. Like people are like, oh, it's Friday, it's another week, or it's over, or it's Monday, weekend was too short. I'm just like, life's too short. Figure out something that makes you happy.
Right. So I hope my kids look at me and they're like, Dad enjoyed what he did. Work was something that it was an integration into life. And he figured out ways to scale time. And I can do that too, because I don't want my kids to feel like they are prisoners of any circumstance. Because the reality is there are 24 hours in a day and everybody has 24 hours.
The same amount of hours as Warren Buffett.
Exactly. You couldn't have said it better. And Warren Buffett is obviously crushing it. He does not trade his time for any kind of
and he reads like money. 6 hours of those days. So he's not even like pounding through emails for 10 of those. He is continuing to learn and just add to his own value, but then also just become more wiser in the value that he gives to the world. Right.
And I think, just being that example for my kids, I hope that is my legacy. I don't want them to go into roles when they're in their 30s and they have children and a family and feel like they are a victim. That is just how many times have you heard people say, well, this is just the way it is? And that's just garbage. It's just not true.
It's just you choose to accept that it's the way it is. It is the way it is until you choose no longer to accept it.
We all have a choice. And, if you're not enjoying what you do, move. You're not a tree, move, do something else. And I think that's the most powerful lesson here is you can do those things that you enjoy, and I think there are things that you can do that you're good at, and there are things that you can do that you're passionate about. And if you can find a mix of something that's in between, then that's good. Where you, out of 30 days of the month, you're happy with 27 of them. And there's 3 days that probably suck pretty bad because it's just, conditions.
When you're filing the taxes or keeping track of your expenses so that way you can file your taxes correctly.
I mean, if you're using your strengths 95% of the time, I think you're in a pretty good spot. It's when you're in a role where you're not exercising your strengths even 20% of the time. You're just kind of there to earn money. You're trading time for money. And that's not real, It's not I'm sure it feels very real for the people who are in those circumstances, but it's a choice. And there are other opportunities out there. And, if you don't like it, move. And I hope that through my actions and my example, my kids see that and they will emulate that for themselves in their own life. And they will be happy and feel fulfilled in whatever it is they choose to do. That's success. That's success for me.
We were talking on the podcast I was recording earlier this morning about that the shift of legacy of your service might actually be something that veterans aren't framing correctly. That I think we spend so much time as a veteran trying to make sense of our service. Just why did my friend die? Why did this have to happen? Why did that have to happen? But really, it's all in the past. We never actually shift to a future-focused legacy, like what you're talking about, where you really start to frame what you want to be remembered for, what you want your kids to think about you, how intentionally are you with the time. That I think this is one of the things we start to dive into more in the podcast of framing your legacy correctly, because I believe it's like it's as simple as a light switch. But I think until you recognize that your service is over, it was a 4-year legacy and it's a bunch of stories. But your legacy of your kids, your family, that's seeds in a garden that you never get to actually see grow. And that's where, to me, like the purpose comes back that you lost after serving. Like there's a purpose in making sure your legacy is where you want it to be in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that sentiment.
So I can imagine, based on what you were talking about, that coming home to your marriage was a little bit of a struggle. What advice would you give out there for other dads looking to come home to their marriage?
Man, to be honest with you, it wasn't really a struggle because I think my wife's my best friend, and I feel that I'm her best friend. So really, it was just we really enjoyed being with each other.
And you weren't able to in the beginning.
Yeah, man, it was like it was like torture, man. I'd be at the the recruiting office or traveling on business. I think my last duty station, I was the social media director for the recruiting command, and I traveled like 3 weeks out of the month. It was really great. It was great for points, yeah. And we ended up using those points and using those hotel rewards to go to Disneyland as a family, which was kind of cool. It's kind of fun. But I spent a lot of time away from home and away from my wife, and it did come with some challenges. Like it was just we'd have to reacquaint ourselves after I'd be gone for a week, and it quite honestly just kind of sucked. So in my new life, I'll call it, I've designed a life where I don't travel mindlessly or, without clear purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a great thing for our marriage, being able to spend time with one another and be there. Because I think not being there for the kids in those moments that mattered most, whether it be, like the donuts and dads event at school when my kid's, like one of three that doesn't have a dad there, or whatever, those things, like, okay, you understand that, Dan is away on, doing military duties. But I think there's kind of like this unconscious bias that kind of took over. It's like, well, he's not there, and I'd come back and it was like, she was, upset at me.
Yeah.
And that was tough, and we'd have to deal with it. And it caused, some friction. But I can tell you, just making the decision and knowing exactly what I was looking for, what we were looking for as a family to engineer our life, understanding what we wanted the day-to-day to be, and then seeking that out and making that a reality made all the difference in changing those circumstances. So that was temporary.
So for you, it was really just signaling to your wife that there's the wind's changing, a little bit like Mary Poppins, where the wind starts changing, that just making sure you're clear on your decision and just making it known that I'm now choosing you to come home to.
Right. And, getting out of the military, and saying, hey, this is something she was, she would approach me late at night when I was ready for bed. I'm not sure why it is, but spouses like to talk when you're getting ready to close your eyes and go to sleep. She's like, I'm really unsure of why you're getting out of the Marine Corps. Like, the Marine Corps has been very good to us. It's very secure. You just have 7 more years to go before retirement. And I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. Like, I am so laser focused on an outcome of getting out and getting into a new role where I can have freedom and flexibility to, be the man that I want to be, who I know you need me to be. It was tough at times to kind of
women have that the human essential needs for certainty in their life, and the military provides a high level of certainty.
Oh, it sure does.
Every part of transitioning is uncertain of where you're going to land. Will it be a long-term career? Will it be short-term? Will you get a job right away? Does he have what it takes to survive on the outside?
But isn't that just life, though? I mean, you're always in a
you're
in a role for you're in a role for 3 years. Like, for example, I've been at USAA for about 2.5. I'm moving into a new role now. That's a transition. I went from the Marine Corps to USAA. There was uncertainty there. It was uncomfortable. It was different. There was a learning curve.
I think just talking
we're
about
all
it,
doing that.
It's like if you don't acknowledge it, then it just becomes the elephant in the room that's just there and you never know what to deal with. But I think just listening, understanding, and just having a curiosity sometimes is also where I've taken the approach where to approach something instead of trying to judge it and to give my own opinion, just to explore the curiosity of it, of where the other person's coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is a resource or a book that you would recommend to other military veteran dads?
Something that I found very interesting was The War of Arts. And that's a book by Steven Pressfield. And basically, the premise of the book is anytime you hear something, like you want to do something, and then you hear that other voice in your mind that tells you to procrastinate or put it off or not do it or whatever, that is the adversary stepping into your life and preventing you from becoming the person you need to become to feel fulfilled.
Yeah, to feel alive, to feel purpose in your life again after serving.
And ironically, Pressfield was a Marine. So it's a good book. You should check it out for sure.
I haven't read it, but I've heard it mentioned a couple times. And so it's going to be making my way up the list of.
Yeah, the audiobook's top notch. Definitely worth a listen.
That's good. Nothing worse when I hate a bad audiobook. Especially if it's a good book that I'd like, God, I got to listen to this book because then I'll muscle through it. But Think and Grow Rich was one of those books where I know this book has value. I just need to get through it. But God, this guy's voice is so bad.
Yeah, Think and Grow Rich is pretty slow, but it's a good book. I definitely. I actually read that one when I was 20, and that drastically changed my trajectory as well. I just re-engineered the way I thought about life and everything, and you've got this, I guess you haven't read it all the way through, but it's definitely worthwhile if you get the time to do it. Maybe get the condensed version, like the Tai Lopez version or whatever. I know he has like those condensed audiobooks that you can read a 5-hour audiobook in about 15 minutes or something. Maybe it's good. I'm not sure. This is not a paid endorsement for Tai Lopez, just to be clear.
It's probably just the social media Facebook ads that are coming in front of you from Tai Lopez.
Yeah, I don't know.
What is a parting piece of advice you want to leave for military veteran dads?
Okay, so the biggest thing that I wouldn't call it advice, but a suggestion is you are not chained to any one decision when it comes to your career. And even within your career, you have the ability to shape who it is you want to become, where you want to go, but you got to have the conversation with people, with leaders, and help them understand what your goals are. And if you can do that, I think you'll find that most people are pretty darn supportive of whatever it is you want to do. If you're like, hey, listen, I want to stay in Norfolk, Virginia, or I want to stay in San Diego, California, by and large, I think most leaders will help you do that to enable whatever goals you want to achieve. But you need to have a clear, concise goal of whatever that is. I think from a quality of life perspective, I think unless you're living in a terrible place from a parenting, fatherhood, point of view, maybe you do want to move, but having, a business case to kind of go with whatever it is that you're suggesting to those leaders. For me, that worked really well. Having a conversation with my commanding officer when I was in San Diego, I'm like, listen, I'm getting ready to get out. And he said, hey, if you extend for another year and kind of stay with me along this journey, I'll give you your own office. I will, pay for a conference. You can go to this marketing conference. And as a result, I was able to better position myself for an exit out of the Marine Corps. I spoke at a major marketing conference in that last year, went to the marketing conference in San Diego, met a lot of great people who were able to open some doors for me. And I was able to better position myself for a transition out of the Marine Corps versus just getting out without that extra year and falling flat on my face. But I had to communicate those things and be vulnerable and be like, listen, I'm really not enjoying what I'm doing right now. Here's what I'm thinking, how can you help me? And, you'd be surprised, the colonel was more than willing to help me get to where I wanted to go. But I had to be vulnerable in order to,
Yeah. And just as in general, as a society, we suck at having open and vulnerable conversations because everybody likes to pretend they have it together. And these conversations require you to showing that you don't have it together and you have fears in your life. And people just generally are okay with helping other people. Like they're going to err on helping people. There's people that are going to be assholes but they're far and few between. And as long as you just open up, and at least you're always going to get a no if you don't open up. So it's super important just to have a simple, even launching this podcast. So much of this just came from talking about my goals. People connected me. And now it's people just keep connecting because I continue to talk about the problems I'm having. And they're like, oh yeah, you should talk to this guy. And
yeah, you're not alone. It's not chances are, like, especially when you're talking with senior military leaders, you're not the first person to say these things, Yeah. They're probably, listen, thank you for telling me. I'm happy to help, because they want to keep good talent. They want to keep good people. They want to help you. It's kind of, if you don't ask, you're never going to receive. So be vulnerable, throw it out there, see what happens. Engineer the life that you want. Engineer the career that you want. I think it's absolutely doable. Because at the end of the day, like, your family matters. And if you can request little things that drastically increase that quality of life, then what's the harm?
Yeah. You're just going to be, the worst they're going to say no is no, and you're going to be right back to where you were, which is
Bingo.
where you're going to be if you don't ask at all. So
that's exactly right.
You
Worst
ever
they can
follow
do is
any of the
no.
Stoics?
I haven't, no.
The one thing, and I'm not an avid Stoic reader, but like I've dived into a couple times, like they'll say a thought that there's no way you could tell whether it was in 2000 BC or 2019. And it reminds me that for almost 4,000 years, people have had the same debilitating self-limiting beliefs of thought. And no thought that you're having is the first time you're having that thought. Thousands of humans before us have come. It's just, we got to keep talking, because only when you keep talking, you'll find someone that's walked that problem and be like, oh yeah, I've solved that 2 years ago. You do X, Y, and Z, and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, it's crazy. You just got to just be you, be your authentic self, ask the question. You know, if it causes you to get emotional while you're doing it, so be it.
And it builds you up to not be alone on the other side, because that's usually what eats most veterans alive, is they don't talk to people. So then they just become this lonely person that doesn't have that same tribe, and they keep hearing these demons in their head that keep talking that their life isn't worth living, and then they eventually figure out and decide to kill themselves. And it's sad, but it begins with just talking. Like that's the first step to try to come home. To me, that I keep repeating a lot, is you just killing that belief that you're not alone is the first step.
Yeah.
And you can start well before, and you can even just build a nice, good landing pad on the other side of that transition.
Sure.
I love that advice. Well, Dan, I love this episode. It's going to be good stuff. We went into areas we never talked about social media before. I wasn't planning on it. I never connected that you're the social media guy, but I like that conversation. And I know we probably proed it a little. Anybody that has teenagers, I'm sure we hit a few nerves with our conversation today. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. Is there anywhere best place to connect with you, Dan, if people want to connect with you?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Shoot me a note. I have a website, danevansonline.com. You can find me there, but best place is probably Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn.
All right. And I'll include all of your social handles in our show notes for any of the listeners that want to connect you quickly.
Cool.
Well, Dan, you enjoy your night. And again, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
That's a wrap. And thank you for listening to today's show. And I really hope you enjoyed it. The lifeblood of any new podcast are the reviews. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it, and you will help us get the message out to even more military veteran dads. As John Maxwell says, if there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. Dads, it's time to come home.